Delivery of summons papers, going to the military registration and enlistment offices, sending to war. Covert mobilization continues in Russia. Let me remind you that on October the 28th, Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, announced the end of the so-called partial mobilization, and everything would have been fine, but there is still no Putin's decree on the end of mobilization for the Russian war in Ukraine. It is evident that Russian authorities never fully halted mobilization efforts, which means that a limited number of mobilized recruits are still being forced through the training system at the same time as conscripts are going through their own training cycle. From the report of the American Institute for the Study of War, the military political leadership of Russia has prepared a document, Conclusions of the War with NATO in Ukraine. It is distributed among military personnel. The document refers to the need to mobilize 5 million Russians. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine says that such messages could mean that the Kremlin is preparing to announce a second wave of the so-called partial mobilization.
A part of this masterpiece highlights, among other things, the main problems of the Russian occupation forces, among which are the inability of commanders to command personnel in the troops, the unsatisfactory state of discipline and combat training, the obsolescence of weapons and military equipment, the impossibility of commanders of making decisions without mandatory coordination with the command, etc.
At the same time, Russia cannot physically call up 5 million men. That is why mobilization is held in waves.
They make a conveyor precisely because they do not have the opportunity to make this mobilization one time, due to insufficient infrastructure, insufficient personnel, and even conditional tanks, that is, equipment, weapons, uniforms, and so on. Of course they would like to do it one time, however they cannot, and that's why they have a mobilization conveyor, and nothing indicates that it has been stopped at all, just as nothing says that it will be stopped for some reason until Russia loses.
To compensate for losses at the front line, the Russian authorities decided to mobilize prisoners and expand the status of military personnel to members of volunteer formations. Putin has also instructed to create a database of Russians who should be registered with the military. Meanwhile, work on mistakes and modernization of military enlistment officers continues inside Russia. Therefore, the conclusion is obvious: mobilization will not end. In general terms, the plan is something like this. For now, to gain time and stabilize the front line with the help of the mobilized Russians, and then start all over again in the spring. By the spring of the next year, the loss in killed and wounded could be about 100,000 people. But this does not scare anyone. They will be replaced by conscripts. A source close to the Federal Security Service of Russia in a commentary to the Russian edition of Important Stories. Russian military commissars do not count killed of those mobilized. They are thrown into the hottest points of the front line, including Bakhmut, which the Russian invaders have been unsuccessfully trying to capture for more than a month. The Russians themselves also talk about huge losses among their troops.
We had 16 people in a platoon, do you get it? Machine gunners, 16 people. In short, there are 5 people left. Basically everyone was killed.
The only way for a mobilized Russian not to stay in Ukrainian soil forever and not become a war criminal is to surrender to the Ukrainian Defense Forces. You can get advice on how to be captured correctly and safely thanks to the I Want to Leave project. The phone numbers you can see on the screen. Ukrainian defenders guarantee all prisoners compliance with the Geneva Conventions, 3 meals a day, medical care, and the opportunity to contact their relatives. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Valeria Nekapelova, UATV News.